I think, like everybody else, it's been a very busy couple of weeks as we all start to return to our buildings. Some libraries are doing home delivery, some libraries are doing curbside services, and some libraries may be offering other services to their patrons. So that's one of the exciting things about today as we all come together is the opportunity to discuss what sort of things we are offering for our patrons in this very unique time in circulation services. So I'm so glad that everybody took time from their busy schedules to join us this morning. And I know that Juan and I are excited to hear what is going on at everybody's libraries. So we're very happy to have you all here, and a very big welcome to Jane from Glenside Library. We're so glad that you were able to join us this morning and hear what's going on, from all the member libraries in SWAN. So thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. So starting on our agenda this morning, um, we have some reminders that our first delivery pickup and drop off is tomorrow. So tonight, um, everybody should be putting their delivery out. And I was just wondering if anyone had any questions about delivery or had any concerns about delivery. If you had any questions, you can put them in the chat and we can see if we can get a discussion going about delivery going forward. So I'm going to kind of watch the chat to see if there's any concerns about delivery, any questions, anything that we need to have a discussion about regarding that.
Peggy, would you like me to go to your link here?
Sure.
Okay.
I know that the links provide some very nice documents and some very nice FAQs regarding delivery and the dates for the two special pickups that will be occurring. One is overnight tonight. So tomorrow morning when staff come in, there will be a wonderful surprise waiting for all of us in our first delivery. And then the next special, I'm considering it kind of a special delivery, is scheduled for June 25th. So that's the next day. And then delivery can resume on a normal schedule on June 29th. If you've sent in a request to have it resume on that day, which you need to do by emailing Rails. So I do see we have some questions from Rebecca. Is Rails picking up our transit bins on June 18th or just dropping off our bins? It's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that they also will pick up our bins also tonight. Is that correct? Is that everybody else's understanding? Yes, Swan is saying
Yeah.
they're picking up bins also. So get everything ready today that you have. And Rebecca says we have tons of bins going out. And I agree, Rebecca. I also have a big stack all ready to go for pickup tonight. So it's not only drop off, but it is also a pickup this evening. So we're getting them ready to go out for pickup tonight. Any other questions? I'm kind of watching the chat. I'm just kind of seeing if anybody else has it. Right. And the same thing will be happening next week, overnight on Wednesday into Thursday morning. So you can have the same routine occur if you've sent in a request for that to happen to Rails, that they will pick up and drop off overnight on Wednesday evening into Thursday morning. So on Thursday you could potentially have another pickup and delivery if you've so chosen. But you just need to let Rails know that you want that. So any other questions about that? Any other concerns? And then just a reminder that Rails does not want you to quarantine materials in their bins. We do need to unpack all the materials and take them out of the bins and then wipe the bins down and reuse them. And all that information is in these two documents that are connected to this link in our agenda. So they're very informative documents that are connected to this link. So they're quite helpful. Okay. I'm not seeing any new questions, so it seems like everybody's ready to go on delivery. All right. Moving along on the agenda is curbside pickup. And I know that Victoria from River Forest had some questions regarding curbside pickup. And I know this is something at our library we will be starting soon. So I'm interested to hear what other members' libraries' experiences have been with curbside pickup. But Victoria would like to know, for patrons who place holds on multiple items over several days, do you put everything in one bag or several bags? So that is her question.
Um,
Oh,
at Lansing, I know what we do is we put them in separate bags. That's just because we put sheets of paper on the front of them that tell them when when it was last time that the items were touched, so that they can quarantine them at home.
okay.
So at I almost said Mokina, which is where I live, not where I work. Clearly, I haven't had enough coffee today. At Westmont Public Library, if we get more for a patron, we'll just stick it in the same bag because we don't have that many bags, and bags are a hot commodity. So that way they just have it all in one. As long as it all fits in one bag, we'll put it in one bag. We do have some patrons that have enough items that they do have to get two bags. But we have plenty of patrons that seem to remember a couple of things the next day before they picked it up, and we'll see it on the pick list. So our staff are trained to check to see we have a curbside document if they already have a bag ready to go, to add that item to the bag so that we're not doing double entries and we're not doing double bags. Because before we were finding that, we would, right when the patron would come pick something up, we had one more thing for them. So we're just trying to be really on top of getting those extra items in those bags if patrons have stuff to be picked up.
Okay, thank you, Brittany. All right, I'm seeing some responses here in the chat that, let me see if I can scroll down here. LaGrange is using several bags. They're running the pick list every day. And at Orland, if the patron has not picked up their items, Orland adds to the bag. And Rebecca further clarifies, we're only holding items on the curbside shelves for 7 days, so each day gets a new bag. And Laura says that they're using separate bags if the items are pulled on another day, so patrons need to pick up their items within 3 days. Sandy says they staple multiple bags together. And someone else says that several bags if needed, but they are limited to 10 items per pickup. So it seems like libraries have a variety of strategies for handling this. Does this answer your question, Victoria? If you want to unmute yourself and let us know.
She said yes.
Yes? Okay, we got a yes from
Yes.
Victoria. Okay.
I just wanted to touch before you move on, Peggy.
Okay.
Lucas also is stating that they update a last touch by staff date, which I think is pretty interesting, in case anyone else wants to adopt that practice as well.
Yes, I've heard of that. I know that I heard one other library was doing that. I'm trying to remember. I think somebody mentioned that. I don't know if Debbie from Indian Prairie is here, but I heard that I thought it was maybe Indian Prairie was doing that. I know that I heard another library was also doing that. So I think that's great that libraries are, giving that much care to the items, and I think that really sends a message to patrons that, a lot of thought and consideration are going into the handling of those items. Any other thoughts on that topic? Okay. So in terms of curbside pickup, I also wanted to just touch on curbside communicator. And I just wanted to see if anyone had any tips, tricks, any feedback on using curbside communicator, and kind of share what their experiences have been with using that product.
We've been using Curbside Communicator at the Lansing Library, and we do like it a lot. One of the things that is easier for us is we just have one person responding to the text when people arrive, because we found that, like, if multiple people had it open, their instinct is to all reply at the same time, and that can be confusing for the patron and for them. So we just have one person respond, and then another staff member runs the items out.
Okay. That's a good bit of advice. Anyone else have any thoughts? Any experiences with curbside communicator that they'd like to share?
We have a few things in chat, Peggy. Victoria is saying that they had some tech issues on older phones that seemed to have a bit of trouble with it. And Julie has customized her curbside communicator to make it faster. And
Julie, can you share that a little more? Like how you made it faster? I'm curious.
I can tell you that what we did, can you hear me?
yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
What we did was we eliminated several of the automatic responses to the patron. So once the patron sends their message, I'm here, then Curbside would send a message that asks them a question like, what's your name and barcode number? So there were several questions that the patron had to answer before the staff was notified that the patron was communicating. So we eliminated all those automatic responses from Communicator, and when the patron says, I'm here, they're asked to give their name, barcode number, space number, car information, and so then immediately we see that the patron is out there. So we've eliminated that lag time, or it seemed to be a lag time. And Communicator works faster for us and much better this way.
Okay, that's very interesting, because I know that I think it was at the last fireside chat, Stephen Schluert was saying don't over automate curbside communicator, and I think this might have been what he was referring to. Not to have so many canned responses.
Hi, this is Steven. Just hang in really quick. Yeah, that's what Julie's describing is pretty much exactly it. So I'm just kind of listening on the sidelines, but yeah, that's kind of what I was going for.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Because at our library we're going to launch that curbside communicator shortly, and it's good to know, get the feedback for all these different experiences, so we can kind of learn from what other libraries have already experienced in using the product. Okay, And then Julie had another question here. When libraries reopen and curbside continues, can CERC help with patron ability to indicate they want curbside? Do you want to expand on that, Julie?
I just wonder if there's a way in workflows or in enterprise for a patron to indicate I'm going to want curbside so that we can separate the curbside pickups from the rest of the hold shelf. Otherwise, we're trying to figure out how are we going to know that a patron is going to want to pick up outside.
Is there, I'm trying to think. I agree because I know at our library, we're already talking about, once things get back to normal, we're going to continue curbside, so it'll be a.
Sorry, at Westmont, I actually put in that ticket because we were wondering the same thing. So according to, and I know SWAN staff are on this call, according to SWAN, there is no way to do it in enterprise. Our only option is to choose, there's that drop down that prints on a hold wrapper slip, the location. So they've added curbside to that, but that can't be set by patrons when they're placing a hold. It has to be set by us. So that's the exact conversation we've been having at Westmont because we actually opened to the public July 1, and we need to figure out how they're going to choose where to find their holds. And so right now, the best we have, which isn't the best per se, is we're actually putting everything on our hold shelf, not checking anything out. And then if someone comes by a curbside, we'll grab it, check it out, and bag it because we just know patrons are going to say, even if we ask them and change that in the system, we know they're going to, oh, I want it curbside, and then they're going to show up at the desk or, vice versa and not remember what they did. So we're going to have it all in one area so that if they come in and pick it up, it's ready for them. But then it does add a little bit of work on the staff side if they come through curbside to grab it, check it out, and bag it.
Actually, Brittany, at Eisenhower, that's how we're kind of envisioning setting ourselves up too, is the exact same thing, just having one giant hold shelf and then accommodating patrons whatever way they want things. Do they want a home delivery? Because we're also doing home delivery, and that, or curbside, or face to, in-person pickup, and then just processing the items at that time, dependent on, the patron's wishes. Because we're going to do the exact same thing, because, also on any given day, the patron may want something different. And we want to be the flexibility of being able to accommodate whatever they want. So it is going to be a little challenging, but we want to be able to offer patrons as many options as possible because their situations are going to change.
Yeah, this is Dawn and from SWAN, and exactly what you guys are describing is the problem we're facing. We can put a value or a variable in the patron record, but that becomes their one choice, and people do change their choices on a day-to-day basis, weather related, whatever. So it can't even be associated when you think about it with particular holds because you never know when those holds are going to be trapped and available for the patron. So that's the whole problem with having it embedded in the system because it's associated with either a hold or a patron, not with the day that those items are available for them to pick up. So it sounds like Brittany's workflow process is probably a good solution. We can certainly put the preference in to give people a heads up, but that's going to be associated with the patron from then on out until it's changed.
Can I, Brittany, this is Brittany from Westmont, ask a quick question? then in regards to this, because we figured this portion of it out, and I know this is something that SWAN's been discussing in the background, but then our big thing is that we need hold notifications turned on, because if we're not checking them out to the patron and they're not getting that notice, and if it's just going to live on the hold shelf where our patrons can then choose what they're doing, they need to know their holds are available. So I know I put a ticket in and there wasn't a firm date, but there was a potential of maybe an opt-in process to getting our hold notices back on. Do we have any update about that?
I think this is a good venue to get feedback from everybody to try and help us make that decision. So I think that's on the agenda at some point to talk about.
Yeah, actually, Brittany sent an email, so we were gonna kind of add it
We're going to
at the bottom, add it wherever, but
Yeah.
it's brought up now, so let's dive in.
Yeah.
I vote to be able to put in hold notifications as soon as possible. Just kidding, not as soon as possible. But I do understand that we are not not everyone's opening the same day we are. So I get that is frustrating and could be hard. I see Jessica put in about June 29th. I would totally be for it a couple of days before. I just don't want to have to, for me, I don't want to create like a workaround that's only that we have to do for a long period of time. So I get that maybe I won't be able to get the exact day I want, but if I can get it somewhere around July 1, then if we do have to do some sort of workaround, then it's only for a couple of days versus, a couple of weeks.
Okay, I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing that some responses from Jessica that she just sent in a ticket that she would like to see notices on the 29th. Terry would like
Wow.
to see notices, would be great. Julie would like to see notices turned on anytime. Jane Young is saying on the 6/29 sounds good. Rebecca is saying she would like hold notifications, but I still want to check the items out to patrons for curbside pickup. So we are seeing some feedback here regarding regarding the hold notices. So it does seem like it's something that's very much on people's minds. Sue is saying by the beginning of July would be great. Does anybody have a different date in mind than end of June, beginning of July? I'm kind of watching the chat here to see if anybody has a thought that's different. So Dawn and Crystal, does this information help SWAN?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is Lucas McKeever from Elmwood Park Public Library, and I totally get the idea of wanting notifications. I would just say our experience at Elmwood Park is the more notices or emails people are getting from SWAN, the more they are confused and calling us. So like we got a lot of people calling about their card expiring in July, even though we know that those are going to be moved to a different expiration date based on if libraries aren't open and able to renew cards. So I think things like that, if we can preemptively think of like, oh, that maybe doesn't need to go out because we're probably going to automatically move those dates, that would be ideal. It would cut down on the concern that our patrons are facing. I know holds, if we're going to stick to a sort of curbside model, even if we do open, holds wouldn't be as big of a deal because our checkout process would prevent people from receiving those. But we have had issues with like newly processed items where in their account, it shows that there's a hold available for pickup since it had been recently processed. And so then they think that that means they can come in, but that's not a notification or anything. But just the more we throw at patrons, the more confusion we are seeing.
And I also kind of to piggyback off Lucas, we also don't want to encourage patrons to appear at your library multiple times during the week. We were having a chat about notices yesterday and kind of looking at that verbiage and trying to come up with something that is sort of universal, that will also kind of tell the patron to let you to contact their home library. I understand when you're opening, you want these notices to go like Brittany has said, otherwise you're going to have to call each patron of yours and tell them that their hold is there. It's kind of this rock and a hard place. What are you all just doing now? If I know some of you are just checking things out and emailing the checkout receipt to the patron, and that's kind of a notification and to the patron. And if the patron doesn't have an email address, are you calling those patrons and letting them know that their items are available for curbside pickup?
I see that Jane wrote that she's calling everyone. That's what we're doing at Lansing too, because what we're finding is that even though we're sending the email, patrons tend to ignore that. So, like during the first few days, we get like maybe 10 or 12 curbside pickups without calling anyone and just sending the emails. But then after we started calling them and sending the emails, we were seeing like 25 to 30 curbside pickups.
This is pesky Brittany from Westmont again. I'm sure you guys are gonna hate hearing my voice by the time this meeting ends. I know when I originally sent in my ticket, there was a, sorry if you hear a screaming toddler in the background, that's my son. I know there was a potential of maybe like an opt-in process so that those who are still just doing curbside and don't want notices to go out to patrons, they wouldn't go out. But then for those of us who are opening, because we're currently checking the items out, sending the emails or calling, but with the model that I said earlier, since we can't actually have the patron choose where they want to pick their item up, once we open, it's all going to be on the hold shelf. I can't check those items out to the patrons like preemptively and send that email notification. It really would be that every single item that is placed on hold, we would have to call, let them know, or email them. So I don't know if the opt-in is an option. I think it would be great because then it's not forcing all libraries to have to be on the next step. I do know my neighboring libraries, a lot of us are opening between the days of July 1st and July 6th. So there, I think there's kind of two different stages of where people are at. And so if there was kind of an opt-in, it would allow people to kind of stay at the stage they're at and not creating, I don't want to create problems for people. And I understand that without doing it, it creates problems for me. So that's why I think the opt-in, when that was put in the ticket, I was like, ooh, that would be great. It would make a lot of people happy.
I'm looking at the chat. I see that there are some libraries that are calling everyone. I know, yeah, I see quite a few. And yeah, it seems that, and then there's some libraries that are also that are emailing and then calling after 3 days. But it does seem like they're also there are a lot of libraries that are also okay. And then Julie's saying if a library is not open, the current process of checkout only will eliminate the confusion of too many notices. Isn't that true? Julie, do you want to explain this more?
I'm just thinking that if notices are turned on, but you're not triggering holds, you're just checking out to the patrons from the pick list, you eliminate that confusion idea because you're still only getting one email that notifies you that you have items to pick up. Isn't that right? So you're not triggering any holds, so you're not producing any hold notices. You're just checking out to the patron. So they're still only getting that one notice.
That is correct, Julie.
Right. But there might also be a library, for instance, we keep things on the hold shelf and we don't check them out until we're ready to deliver them to the patron. So if you turn hold notices on, we're going to have a problem because we're going to have patrons getting all sorts of hold notices and our building is closed. And there, what I mean, and all these hold notices are going to be generated and we don't check the items out,
Right now.
the items to the patron.
And how are you notifying patrons right now? You're just calling them all?
Call them because we set up a delivery to them. See, we're kind of unique because we're doing home delivery to all our residents
Cool.
at this point. So we call each and every patron, set up a delivery, and then at that point we check the items out. So all the items are on the hold shelf until that time. So if we turn hold notices on, that's going to cause us a lot of a lot of confusion for our patrons.
Peggy, have you thought of using the curbside generic user then?
I could. That would have to work around if we turn hold notices
Right.
on, yes.
And that
so
would also, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, finish your thought.
It would also take care of any of those items that are being processed and triggering a hold, trapping the hold, if you check it out to curbside.
So I think what it illustrates is we have a lot of libraries in our consortium and we have a lot of different situations.
We certainly do.
So, but there are also our workarounds. So, I think we just have to carefully consider anything we do. There's going to be pros and cons to any decision we make. Any other thoughts about this?
Just that if you do decide you want to use the curbside generic user or the quarantine user, please open a ticket and we'll create that user for you. Every library will have their own unique generic user.
Fantastic. Any other thoughts about notices?
So right now what we're seeing is a mix, right? So there would be possibly an opt-in version of notices going out. Now I think this question that I believe Don just posted is probably something along the lines of notices going out. If we do hold notices and send them, would that be once a day, in the morning, in the afternoon, or in the evening, so that they're ready, patrons are ready in the morning to come to your library and pick the items up? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Don, but that's how I'm interpreting this question. Are there any thoughts on that time frame? I'll take anything.
Yeah, Jane is saying afternoon. Brittany really wants her hold notices.
So when do you all normally process items coming out of quarantine? Because it's during that process that those items could trap a hold and then trigger a notice if the timing is just right. So we kind of want to know what your process flow and timing is for that process so that the notification doesn't go out to the patron right away, that you have time to then figure out what you're going to do with that thing.
It looks like many people process their quarantined items in the morning. Julie's saying anytime as long as a notice is sent. Many other libraries are saying they process their quarantine items in the morning. So Lucas is saying if we discharge the materials coming out of quarantine in the morning, an afternoon notification would catch those holds. Julie says she processes her quarantine items in the morning. I do too. That's the same. Jane is also saying she tries to get her pick list done by noon. I think that might be very typical of a lot of libraries that they try to do that pick list early in the day. Someone has asked also how long is everyone quarantining? If everybody kind of wants to weigh in on that, I think Teresa would appreciate that. Let's see, a lot of people are quarantining 7 days. Right now, that seems to be the overwhelming response that I'm seeing in the chat, that most are quarantining 7 days. So I hope that helps you, Teresa. Okay. So anything else on notices before we move on to another topic? I certainly want to give this enough discussion and attention.
So can we get a little bit of feedback on if we ran hold notifications once a day and we did it in the afternoon, what would be a reasonable time to send those out? Like if you could choose one time, what would be a targeted time?
I'm kind of watching, let's see here. Okay, somebody said 12, 2 o'clock, 1 p.m., 12, noon, 1 o'clock. So afternoon, 2 o'clock. So it seems like there's a range between 12 and 2 o'clock, Dawn.
Okay, that helps us. Thanks.
Oh. Okay, before we leave this topic, anything else anyone wants to share regarding notices? Brittany, any final thoughts?
No, I promise to be quiet the rest of the meeting.
You don't have to be quiet. This is what makes for a great discussion. Participation is what makes it much more interesting. So no, I'm glad you brought the topic up. Okay, and I appreciate everyone that's shared some tips regarding curbside communicator. I find those very helpful, so thank you. Okay, moving
Peggy?
on. Yes, I'm
Peggy,
sorry.
before you move on, can I ask everyone, we did have a library chime in that their patrons are not receiving their email receipts, checkout receipts. Is anyone else experiencing that? We haven't seen any tickets regarding it, so.
Hi, Vicky.
Yes.
See, what I noticed was, like, when we first started, a lot of people, I don't think, were checking their emails. And I think it's just because it is all new to them, so they don't know to look for that.
Okay.
But then also, I can't say whether they were or they weren't because I wasn't getting any feedback from any of my patrons. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, they wouldn't know to bring it up if they didn't know that they were receiving them.
Right.
Well, and this was LaGrange, and what was actually happening is they were seeing that the items were checked out on their account, but they never received the email indicating what the curbside pickup was. So they had no idea why the items, they said, I never came to the library's closed. How could the items be checked out to me? So It was definitely Yahoo, Gmail, and Hotmail accounts that were the issue, especially Yahoo. And they just, I mean, they got the checkout receipt went out to them, but they never received the email. So.
Okay, and we did enter in here that you should use the patron email status tool when patrons are reporting that they did not get their email receipt. It may be that they have either marked us as spam, or they have some kind of filter in place in their email where they're just not seeing the email. So we definitely want to promote that patron email status if your patron is telling you that they haven't received their checkout receipt.
Just chiming in real fast, though, it seems like the issue isn't the emails from SWAN, it's the emails from the library regarding the curbside checkout procedure.
These were the emails that were sent from the email checkout receipt wizard in workflows.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else regarding that? Okay. All right, discussing ILL resumption. Victoria from River Forest was interested in hearing everyone's thoughts regarding the resumption of ILL. And Liz from Chicago Ridge was interested in knowing when it will begin again and who makes this decision.
Peggy, I'm just going to jump in here really quick.
Great.
Dawn was so nice and put together a PowerPoint for us to take a look at regarding, let me make sure y'all can see this. Okay. Regarding resource sharing, we recently put out a survey. This is about when resource sharing should start. We've heard mixed reviews. Some wanted it to start really early. Others wanted to wait until August, middle of August. So we put out a survey based off of our last fireside and quarterly meeting. Dawn put this together and sent it out, and ultimately I believe the directors are the ones who are going to be making that decision when all of that starts. So Dawn did a comparison here of activity, so your checkouts, just to kind of let you all know where we're sitting here. About 20% of the activity has resumed within SWAN. So you kind of see the numbers throughout the consortia for a day based off of what it was last year versus this year. So although it may not seem like a lot, those numbers are pretty impressive considering what is going on in the world. Let me get to my next slide here. We do have some results based off of the survey that Dawn put out. There's been 46 responses. So we do have that. Given the choices, which date would you prefer to resume full resource sharing? We had September 9th, August 12th, or July 7th. And it seems like overwhelmingly we have the July 7th date here, kind of winning out over the more cautious dates. And we also had the reciprocal barring privileges question thrown out there as well. And it seems pretty overwhelmingly the same, a little bit less than the full resource sharing question. However, It does seem like the directors are wanting to go into a direction of having July 7th be a date where reciprocal borrowing privileges and resource sharing would pick back up. Does anyone have any questions, or Dawn, you want to say anything about this so far?
You know, it seems like, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You know, it seemed like in the fireside chat that the larger libraries wanted to wait later.
Yeah.
And the smaller libraries, I mean, I just ran a report. I've got 200 on shelf holds, like off the pick list every day. I've got over 3,000 items that LaGrange patrons have holds on in SWAN. So, I mean, there's just a big disconnect between how the smaller libraries can fill the holds or we can't. So, I mean, I think that was the discussion at the fireside chat, was the larger libraries are like, we don't care. But the smaller libraries, I mean, we can't fill those holds, and our patrons are calling us. I mean, dozens of calls every day.
Yeah, and actually what we found, Rebecca, with the results and which libraries are responding to what, it really isn't so much a measure of large and small libraries. What we kind of have found is that libraries that started offering curbside earlier are ready now because they've gotten through that backlog. So it's more a timing thing. And we know that libraries are in different places. So we're going to have to accommodate those that are ready July 7th, those that want to wait till August 12th, and even those that need to wait till September. So we are looking at how do we make this possible for everyone to pick one of those 3 dates. You know, and maybe open up everything September 9th, depending on how things are there. But we know people want to get back to a more normal processing. We want to accommodate that. We also know there are libraries that just aren't able to staffing wise right now. So we're working to allow both of those things to happen and figuring out a way that, you know, it sounds pretty easy to turn on resource sharing the way we had it in the past. We just remove those temporary hold map entries and things will start coming back. But what we've never had is a reciprocal rules in place. So not only are the libraries wanting to wait until August 12th, they're not just concerned with the lending side, they're concerned with the borrowing. They can't have that influx of material coming from those that are willing to share either. So it's a little bit different dynamic than we've ever had to deal with in the past. So we are working, you know, to get the system to enable us to do that. So as libraries share, they're sharing both on the lending and borrowing side.
I definitely recognize the complexity, and I also think it's going to be difficult when you have some libraries that are supplying and some that aren't. I think the concern is, like, if for example, a library was not supplying and they were the only copy that was available, I just think that would be difficult. I think it's already difficult for our patrons to understand, you know, like I'm not loaning things from LaGrange Park, which is a mile away. So, you know, we're literally driving the books back and forth to each other's libraries. So I just, you know, I'd just as soon start as soon as we can start, but I do recognize the complexity that, you know, not everybody has been back in the building since May 1st like we have.
And we've also seen things like space come up, you know, about where would I store these things? I still have to quarantine them. You know, so it is more complex than just, I know everyone's ready to serve patrons and ready to go, but even Victoria in the chat said, you know, they're River Forest, they're small and they're not ready for this. You know, we're seeing libraries having not only space issues and staff, but staffing issues. They can't handle a quick turnaround at this point like this. So.
But you know, this survey has been very helpful, and your input is helpful, and we're trying to accommodate as many scenarios as we can, you know, so that you can get back to where you want to be. But we also know that we cannot turn it on all at once for everybody because we're in different places. So we're balancing that, and we hope to get closer and closer to normal as we move through the summer.
There's some questions coming in the chat. Is anyone quarantining materials received through delivery? Are we expected to quarantine blue bin deliveries from rails before checking them in? And then Victoria said that she does not plan to quarantine the limbo items from rails, or are items coming back?
We're all going to answer at once.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Vicki.
Go ahead.
Rails has said that you do not need to quarantine the items that are coming in from them. Everything is quarantined for 1 week before it gets to them, and they are taking all of the necessary PPE precautions. That's the word I wanted, with their staff. And when it comes to you, that you do not have to quarantine them, but you can if you would like.
Yeah, it really is a local decision. We did last week's fireside chat had some kind of timelines and charts to go through to help libraries inform themselves on whether or not they would like to quarantine items and how that would affect, you know, the turnaround of your items and getting those back on the shelf or back ready for another patron. It's a delicate balance. Some libraries we've heard are going to be cautious and planning on quarantining items from rails. Some aren't. But either way, like I think it was Vicki who mentioned it before, or maybe it was Peggy. I can't remember. You know, wiping down those bins, just trying to stay as safe as possible. Yeah, it doesn't seem like, at least in this chat that I'm seeing, that there are many people quarantining items that are incoming from rail.
And just for clarification too, at least until you have patrons in the building, if your items are on the shelf and they are only handled by staff following PPE guidelines, then you don't have to wait 7 days before that can be picked up by rails. That can be immediately processed. It's already quarantined. The concerning factor that rails is requiring is they require 7 days from a patron return of an item before it is put back into delivery to the next patron. So whatever your normal quarantining process is, if it's 7 days and you put it on shelf, it can immediately then go into rails delivery, or from quarantine at the day it comes out into rails delivery. Those of you that are quarantining for 3 days, you need to, if you're following rails guidelines, you need to, any item that is going back to rails delivery then needs to have that additional 4-day of quarantine. So you just have to come up with some procedures to kind of match your quarantining process with that 7-day from rails before they receive it.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question? I'm full of them today, much like Brittany. Is anyone using the patrons not being able to place holds because you don't own a copy? Are you using that as kind of a patron-driven acquisitions tool?
Our reference librarians at Lansing are. So we're trying to keep an eye on, you know, what holds we can't fulfill, and then we're giving a heads up to the selectors for those items.
I'm glad that that some libraries, it looks like some libraries have taken advantage of that. I'm glad to hear that. It's we've had libraries in the past want to use a patron-driven acquisitions type of model. And boy, this is the way to do it, I think. So
Sure
thanks
is.
for the,
Yeah,
thank you for the inputs. I was just curious.
I'm seeing a lot of libraries, just several libraries in the chat respond yes.
Mhm.
So it seems that that's being very positive,
Yeah.
that libraries are using that. Okay. Okay.
Wonderful. I
Any
just
other?
wanted to finish up these few last slides. I just kind of wanted to show you guys who's been checking out how much over the past 14 days. Woodridge, you get a prize, a big gold star. It
We've never
looks
beat Donna's before.
first time for everything. Here you go. This is over 1,000. Seems like everyone's really just plugging away. And I know your patrons are probably really ecstatic to finally be able to get some items, some new items in. And Dawn made this fancy chart. Yeah, there's been obviously a spike from where we were back in March. We checked out a great surge. We saw that. And then obviously we've pretty much flatlined here and we are climbing back up. This is excluding weekends on this chart. So I think that, you know, this is just a nice way to see kind of where we were this past these past couple of months. And here are our check-ins. These are, wow, this is fun. And it looks like a little mountain here. And we're steady climbing back up on our check-ins. You know, so I just want to thank Dawn for putting all of this together. We're seeing we're not where we were, you know, before we all closed down, but you know, hopefully we'll get back to whatever or some resemblance of normal. But you guys are doing a great job, and I'm sure you're hearing back from your patrons how happy they are with everything. So yeah, Dawn, did you want to add anything? I know these are your slides, and I got to show them, but
No, just, you know, we'll keep presenting these just to show that we're coming back. The heartbeat is coming back.
great. Okay.
All right. Is that your last slide,
Yes, it is.
Crystal?
Go ahead. It's all yours. I'll stay quiet now.
Wonderful. No. So any other discussion about ILL resumption before we move on with the agenda? I just want to make sure if anyone else has any questions, any concerns about that. Okay, I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. Okay. All right, and then we had some other topics for discussion regarding reopening to the public. There was some interest in when libraries are planning to open and what that was going to look like for libraries. You know, there were some questions about mask enforcement, opening the building and how staff was going to be protected. Are some libraries going to limit the amount of patrons in their library, the amount of checkouts, browsing, things of that nature? So does anybody want to share, you know, unmute themselves and share some of their library's plans for reopening their building to the public?
I can go. Um,
Okay.
we're going to be starting on the week of the 29th is when we're going to reopen, and we're going to be reopen regular hours and regular staff. Um, the the limitation is going to be we're not going to be allowed to have more than 50 people in the building at any one time, but this includes staff as well. So honestly, it's going to be like maybe 40 patrons. Right now, since it's summer, that's probably not going to be too big of an issue. But when school restarts, that's going to be interesting to see how that works out. For the mask enforcement, and then there was also a little bit more of it in B, dealing with patrons have to try and enforce rules too. 50, Victoria. Not 15. I actually went out to a couple of the stores that are open now, like the Targets and the Walmarts, and I just kind of asked them, how are you guys dealing with your guys' customers that don't want to come in and wear masks? And a lot of them, what they told me was that they'll ask their customer to either, to please wear a mask, or they'll like offer to sell them a mask, but they won't throw them out of the store if they're not wearing one. And obviously, with us being in a library, we can't offer to sell them PPE because, that's already going to be limited to our staff. Another thing too was that I found pretty interesting was, and I think this is just generally good advice, but that the best way to handle somebody who doesn't want to wear a mask is the same way you would handle anyone who was smoking closer to the building or not wearing a seatbelt, which is where you would tell them, that's not safe and that's not something that you should do. But as far as enforcement goes, I think that's going to be a conversation that's going to be between us and our directors to see how they want that to be handled. Because at the end of the day, each of us is going to have to have a conversation with our own staff, since we are frontline staff, and they are going to be the ones who are going to be dealing with this daily.
May I chime in here? Debbie Walsh from National University. We've been open through this whole thing. We never closed. We only allowed our own constituents in. We did not allow any outside visitors. We even disallowed alumni, which was a very serious decision for the university. But we've been tracking everyone who comes into the building, so having sign-in sheets. And we do have issues with masks. Many of our students who've come in to work as groups have been very, very casual about this, and it's been a real concern for the staff. So don't underestimate. There is pushback on this, and we've been told that we just sort of have to remind them, next time you come, you have to wear a mask, but that there's no teeth in it.
Thank you for that. Let's see, Liz from Chicago Ridge, she says that they just opened this week via appointment. For public computer use, patrons must wear a mask, either their own or they'll supply them with one. No browsing is allowed. Rebecca from LaGrange said she's heard that as a public building, they cannot legally limit to LaGrange patrons only. Jane has said that at her library, they're limited to 15 patrons, appointments only, 45 to 60 minutes, and they must wear a mask. If they do not want to or cannot, they may use curbside services, and browsing will be allowed. And at Orland Park, they are handing out masks to those without.
I just wanted to chime in because a couple people were asking, how are you guys keeping count um, of the number of people in the building? We are at Lansing. We have 2 floors, so we have the youth services floor and the adult services floor. We have closed our youth services floor, and so only our adult services floor is open. And the way the way my director is planning for us to do that is she's planning for us to do visual counts. She's not sure about the frequency of them, but she's going to have staff do counts and see how many people are in the building. And there are certain apps I've heard of that you can use to count people. But I haven't looked into them as of yet to see which one would be best.
Okay, there's some comments in the chat right now. Julie's asked who has found a tool to count incoming and outgoing patrons. Debbie said at her institution they had a sign-in sheet and they watched the number of individuals who signed in and out at any point, and their magic number was 50. At Orland, they used a spreadsheet with appointments, and there was staff outside with a laptop to check in and out upon departure. Jane has said that they haven't opened yet, but they will be letting 15 people in, and when they leave, the next 15 will be allowed in, and their doors will remain locked. Rebecca at LaGrange said they're going to allow patrons in the building by reservation only. I know that my director went over to a Chicago Public Library branch to see what they were doing, and they had a staff member stationed outside the door who had a counter, and he was counting as people went in, and then he would keep track when people left. So that's how a CPL branch was doing it. So just to share, an observation at CPL branch, what they were doing to keep track of people going in and out. But I know that CPL wasn't like keeping track if you were a CPL card holder or not. They were just letting anyone into the building. Any other thoughts about this? Any other comments? I know one topic for our management team is mask enforcement, and that's something our management team is talking about now. That's an issue that is very much on our minds, and how we will be handling that. And we're thinking very much about how we will address that issue when the public is allowed back into our building. So I'm very interested to hear what other libraries are thinking about this topic. Any other comments that people would like to share? I'm kind of looking here.
I did want to ask too, like at Lansing, we were initially not going to allow patrons to browse, and we quickly realized that when we're reopen, that's probably what a lot of the patrons are going to want to do. They're going to want to browse. But, it's been my experience so far that, again, like going into the stores and asking them how they have those do not enter or enter only this way in aisles is really not working. So I was wondering too, how are other libraries going to handle browsing of patrons when you guys reopen?
So over at Westmont, we're kind of taking the approach that, I guess patrons wander at their own risk kind of a deal. We talked about those aisles too. And yeah, all of us talked about our own experiences being in stores and just watching people not listen to them. We though have actually removed most seating in our entire library and removed it from the floor and a lot of furniture So to kind of give the impact of this is a quick grab and go service, there's really nowhere. We have a couple of chairs because we understand that people may need to sit if they have any mobility issues. But we've kind of set it up where from the get-go when you walk in, it's very clear that the library is different and that there's really not much to do. There's no study rooms. There's nowhere to sit and read your book. You kind of just go in and go out. And I've kind of just told my staff, you know, we're not going to really, I guess, what you can call police patrons in the stacks and make sure that they're not being on top of each other. We'll just, you know, like you would in a store, you know, it's kind of on them to make sure that they're staying away from anyone else in that aisle. And then obviously we'll deal with patron complaints if they come, but we've tried to set up the atmosphere where it very much looks different and it very much, I hate to say is like not welcoming because we're not trying to do that per se, but we just want to make it clear like this isn't, you're not going to come in and stay here all day because there's nothing to do.
And you know, Brittany, I really get that because that's kind of what we're trying to do too, you know, because at our library, you know, one of the things that is going to make me a little sad when we start reopening is we used to have, like, you know, the elderly patrons who would come in and who would like to have these long conversations with us about how they were doing and how their day was going. But unfortunately, we're not going to be able to encourage that during this time. And yeah, it's going to be very different too, especially since we are also removing all of our seating. And we used to offer coffee in the mornings, which we are no longer going to do either. I am seeing a lot of questions about restrooms that are open to the public. And I'm curious about what people's thoughts are about that.
I know at Eisenhower, we're leaving our restroom, going to leave our restrooms open. I just, you know, we'll just clean them frequently. You know, I just don't see, you know, we just decided that we couldn't close them. They needed to remain open.
What about your water fountains, Peggy? Are you guys going to leave those open too? Because I've noticed that a lot of stores are putting bags over their water fountains too.
That we haven't addressed yet. That we're still getting to that point. So Jane is closing her water fountain. Terry has their water fountain fill-up stations are shut off. As in SWAN has said, the Illinois Department of Public Health has guidelines for public spaces. So that's something. Oh, Erin has a question about open for browsing and quarantine.
Hi, everyone. This is really interesting discussion. So my question is more along the lines of if we have designed our library spaces essentially along the lines of there are areas that are just assumed clean, meaning staff are wearing proper PPE, Rails delivery staff are wearing PPE, and so those items can be assumed to be clean. But anything that a patron is returning would be considered quote unquote dirty. Once you're open for browsing, I would think that same logic means that anything to send via ILL should go through the 7-day quarantine prior to the bin being picked up. So I'm just thinking that through, that for those that want to resume resource sharing and you're open to the public, you may experience massive lag times. I will mute myself.
Yeah, that's a great point because see, like everything on our shelves right now, we know is clean because we have all the staff wearing the proper PPE. Ah, Aaron, why?
You know,
I'm sorry.
Aaron,
I was just thinking about in terms of this, you know, the desire to go back to full resource sharing coupled with a potential phase 4 heading our way and libraries wanting to reopen and not having the full answers that we need as far as, you know, materials and COVID. It just seems like the safe assumption is that once you're open for browsing, you know,
Yeah.
you're making that decision to reopen for browsing, but you're also making a decision that if you're going to be using ILL, you're going to have to factor in quarantining.
Yeah.
I don't know if that affects your decision to open to the public or for ILL, but it certainly is going to affect the speed of your items traveling through the system.
Oh, it's like pulling a thread on a sweater.
that is something, yeah, that is something that I don't think that many of us considered for browsing too. I mean, because with it being the idea that it's going to be a quick grab and go with regards to browsing, I guess I was making the assumption that it would be minimal exposure, but then I don't have any way to quantify that. So would it be? I don't know.
See, and, you know, and see, that's one of the challenges because, like, you know, we're trying to do so much for our patrons, and we're, you know, like when I talk to patrons, I'm like, well, if you want something, just place a hold on it. And then I have the patron, you know, that just they want to get back in the building because they don't know what they want. They want to be able to browse. You know, so your patron that is able to place a hold and select what they want is going to be satisfied with home delivery or curbside. Your patrons that aren't satisfied with curbside, those are the ones that want to come back in the building to browse and look for what they want. Do you know what I'm saying? They're the ones that are going to want to linger in your library because they don't know what they want until they see it. Do you know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
So it is a bit of a conundrum.
But you know, Laura brings up a really good point in the chat where she's saying, are we focusing too much on material? CDC seems to think this is not really how COVID is transmitted. It's like going to the grocery store. Someone may have touched the item you put in your cart. And I agree with that, you know, and then I think even Dawn had mentioned at our last CIRC meeting that they're noticing that it's not so much things as it is people with regards to the COVID spread. So my other thing too is, you know, we don't have a solid time frame of when it supposedly is safe to handle items because, you know, even though Rails is pushing for the 7 days, you know, from what I've read, like the highest amount of time that most places wait for anything is 3 days. So yeah, I think Laura's made a really good point about it.
Yeah, and Swan is saying Laura's point is right. Let's hope better guidelines on materials come out soon. In the meantime, let's keep in mind Rails requirements for items put in delivery. I think it's a good point. Does anybody have any other anything else they want to share about their reopening plans?
I did want to say too, I also saw that someone had suggested or is putting a cart out for materials that patrons didn't want for them to quarantine the items. And I think that could possibly be a good workaround for some libraries too, where they have a cart out for items that a patron was browsing but they didn't necessarily want, and then they can leave it on the cart, and then the library can put them in their quarantine area, if that is something that they choose to do.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Anything else about reopening? Anything else anyone wants to share?
This is Lucas from Elmwood Park. I would just want to maybe revisit sort of this idea of counting who's in the building, because I think one of the things that we have talked about internally, and I'm sure many people have, is just we want to limit the number of people. And I mean, I'm certainly cautious about the items, but when the CDC is pointing to a shared airspace that you are in with someone, like my concern is for staff and patrons who are in the building more so than people who are getting those items. And so I guess in my mind, we have this idea of we're only going to allow a certain number of people in the building, but who is actually going to be the person who is enforcing that? Who's going to ask people to leave? I think with some of these that are more passive, if suddenly there are 55 people in the building, do you know who was there last? Are you going to ask someone to leave? I think that these are situations where we are potentially, especially if our staff is split in half or in 3 groups or whatever it is you're doing, we're going to be asking staff who should not be required to do something like that to do it anyway. And that makes me feel very hesitant about making this next step.
Well, the way we're kind of seeing it at Lansing is we're using, the numbers as, so when we get close to the 50 cap, plus or minus a few patrons, we're going to have to probably lock our door and tell people that they cannot enter until, some more people come out. And then as people come out, we allow other people to come in, because it's much easier to control people coming in than it is, getting people to come out, as any of you could attest, when it comes to closing time at your libraries.
Anyone else have a strategy for keeping count and how you'll be handling things at your library when you get close to your maximum number of people allowed in the building? I would imagine some libraries are going to use their security staff for this purpose. Hey, Yuli at River Grove said that at some shops she's seen someone sitting at the door keeping tally marks of people in and out and locking the door. And then Jane said, in theory, we are letting 15 people in, and then after their 45 to 60 minutes, they must leave, and then the next 15 can come in. And she's saying her doors will remain locked. I'm thinking it might be hard, though, to get people to leave. Yeah. And Laura's saying the doors will remain locked and that there'll be an appointment time.
Laura, like for appointment times, and Jane too, are those just for computers, or is that just for like general browsing or general library use? Because we are going to start doing okay, so that is for everything.
For everything.
Because at Lansing we are going to start doing appointments for computers.
And Laura's saying for everything too.
So then are you going to have patrons call ahead, or do you guys have a system in place for them to make these appointments to Laura and Jane?
They'll call. Okay, so you're gonna have them by appointment and they'll call. Okay. You're gonna use like, it's gonna go in a Google Sheet. Okay, so you're using Google Sheets for that.
And I think that for some libraries, that would be a really good option.
All right. Anything
And then,
else? Okay.
and then, I wanted to say too, keep in mind that like probably the motto of this year is we're gonna adjust as we go. So I think that once we start reopening, we just have to see how that's going to work, how it's going to be more manageable, and adjust as we go on. So, while a lot of these ideas look really good on paper, when we start implementing them, we may see that they're going to need to be adjusted. Some significantly, some not so much. But just keep that in mind too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Juan. So then, with reopening, we're also expecting that there'll be a lot of questions from staff and from patrons. Summer reading this year is definitely looking different for everybody. Um, there's a lot of information to get out to patrons regarding your summer reading and how it's being impacted by COVID-19. How are libraries, communicating that to everybody? I assume, most of you are using your website, social media. Anybody doing anything unique to get this message to their patrons?
I have to say, I cannot recommend having, a web page dedicated to how the library is dealing with COVID-19, because it's very easy, especially for staff too, to direct a patron to there, so that this way they could see all of our up-to-date information. And the other thing too is, being CERC, our staff is always going to be the frontline staff. So they're the patrons are always going to see first. And I definitely want them to stay as up to date as possible on what's going on in the library. So that webpage really helps in making sure that staff is informed about the latest changes that are going on.
Mm-hmm. So I see that some libraries are putting a summer reading log in every hold bag. Some libraries are sending a postcard to residents. Some are putting flyers in curbside bags. So newsletters going into curbside bags. So there's a variety of ways that libraries are communicating with their patrons. I know that at our library, our marketing staff typed up talking points for staff, so when they answer the phone, they can communicate some of the most commonly asked questions to patrons, and that way everybody's consistently giving the same answers, because information seems to be changing so rapidly, and sometimes we have to zig when we're zagging. So we've been using talking points, and that seems to really help, especially when we don't have the full staff in the building and we have these shifts. That way we make sure that everybody's on the same page with the answers that we're giving patrons. And I see that Stephen is mentioning that there's privacy considerations when using Google Docs. And if you're capturing personally identifiable information from patrons, this is not typically the ideal method. Non-enterprise Google Docs subscriptions can raise some questions when it comes to privacy. So thank you, Stephen, for that. Sometimes when I'm doing stuff at my library services desk, I think about you, Stephen. I wonder if you would approve of what we're doing. So I think that's a good way to always protect patron privacy. I always think, would Stephen approve of this? And if the answer is no, I don't do it. So always trying to protect that patron privacy.
What would Steven do or say?
Yeah, what would Stephen do? And if the answer is he wouldn't do it, I don't do it. Let's see. Liz said that Chicago Ridge has sent out a number of postcards to their patrons and that summer reading logs are attached to the library newsletter. And let's see, Lucas is saying that the reference staff has a shared FAQ Google Doc that they can use to answer questions. Yeah, and that's what we're doing too. And that really, really helps. Yeah, Julie, exactly. Maybe we can get little bracelets, WWSD. That's a good idea. Maybe SWAN can market those as a fundraiser.
I have to say it's a team effort. The security mindedness that comes from all of us on in SWAN and in the IT team. So I have to give everyone credit.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, so looking at our agenda, I think we kind of covered this New York Times article. That's the link to it is included on the agenda regarding wearing masks. I think we included it earlier in our discussion. So I don't know. Is there anything else that anyone wants to say about this issue regarding, how they'll handle patrons not wearing masks in their building?
Peggy, before we get to that, I wanted to ask something real quick. For the libraries that are reopening, are you guys going to be having face shields for your staff? Or do you guys have those I'm sorry, I don't know what the term is, but like those fit guards at your service desks, or how are you handling that?
Well, I know at Eisenhower, we're not calling them spit guards because that just, I'm calling plexiglass. I'm calling them plexiglass protectors. I think that sounds much better. But we already have them installed at our library services desk, and then our maintenance team is building them at all our other service desks as well. But we were thinking about face shields for our curbside staff when they're delivering curbside. So let's see, Brittany's saying they have sneeze guards at each service point, but we also have face shields in case you need to go to the floor. And Laura has face shields in the plexiglass stands. And Terry has face shields and sneeze guards. And Jane has the sneeze guards and shields. And Julie has plastic barriers also. Yeah, so it seems like a lot of libraries are having the face shields, masks, and sneeze guards at the desks. And I believe the face shields are available from SWAN. Is that correct? Yes, SWAN is saying yes. So if anyone is interested in face shields, you can obtain those via SWAN.
But Peggy, for your face shields, are you letting your staff take them home and sanitize them? Or how are you handling that?
That I haven't thought about yet. Brittany says they have one per staff member. Brittany, are you letting your staff take them home? He says that's a good question. Juan says they recommend one face shield assigned to each staff member. I would probably say I would want them to leave them at the library. Yeah.
I would say
Yeah.
at Elmwood Park, we also, our director was mentioning that most of her clothes have either no pockets or bad pockets. And so we actually are also getting all staff aprons, because if we're imagining staff maybe walking around with walkie-talkies with a notebook and pen and all of their phone, there may be a need for their hands to not be holding everything. So we're getting everyone aprons as well.
Hey, thank you. That's a great idea. Hey, Terry says they're keeping their face shields in their assigned lockers and they're responsible for sanitizing them.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it makes more sense to keep them at work because, I have the fear that someday somebody's going to come into work and then they're going to probably forget it at home, which, is going to make them working their shift much more difficult. So we'd have to send them home to get their mask.
Right.
Laura, I think we are going to be wearing face shields and a mask.
Okay. Juan, do you have any other questions?
Let me see. No.
No?
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to talk about this article at all, or?
Sure. I just, as I was reading it, I just became very aware that, since we do work with the public, that this is an issue that will be impacting us because there are going to be instances where, someone isn't going to have a mask. And what the article's main focus on was when other customers, or in our case patrons, try to enforce the rules and how that can get really ugly really quick. And so, what I'm telling my staff is, we're going to be dealing it the same way that we would with someone who's smoking too close to the building. We tell them they can't do that, or that's not the safest thing. And then for them to get the mask, which I had mentioned earlier. But another thing too is that I want to make the patrons be very aware. We're all the staff is wearing face masks, and this is why. Hence the lead by example. And then I was just wondering, have any other libraries thought about the possibility of your patrons trying to enforce the wear mask rule and how you would be handling it?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, this is something, in fact, I'm missing a management team meeting this morning, and this is the very topic we're discussing. So this is something we're kind of grappling with right now, is this topic. So it's, it's something very much on our minds. Because I think everybody's had the experience, that you go to a grocery store and you see, the majority of people in the grocery store wearing their masks, and then maybe you have one or two outliers who aren't wearing one. So it's certainly something that's going to come up in the public library for sure.
Oh yeah. Oh look, it looks like Jane already had an altercation. Could you tell us a little bit more about it, Jane?
Yes. So we had one patron using the laptop outside, and another patron came up without a mask, and she started yelling at him. So the difficult thing, I'm hearing reverbs, and I apologize for that. The difficult thing is just trying to keep patrons calm with each other. So I just said, we do have rules. Even though we're outside, we need to keep our distance, and that we all need to respect each other. And going forward, that the library is going to have rules. So, and he was fine with it.
Okay.
And I think that's a good point. We all have to keep in mind that this is going to be a new rule, so we're going to have like a little bit of a grace period um, as we start to reopen, so people can get adjusted to this new norm as well for coming into the library.
Right. It's a new normal for everybody, so I think it's just something that everybody's going to have to get used to. But I think calm is the main word we're going to have to remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Peggy.
I was going to say, and I certainly, I think all of us have had experience with patrons, that haven't complied with other library rules. So it's certainly, we certainly, it's not the first time we've experienced a patron that hasn't complied with the library rule. And we have policies and procedures in place for dealing with those patrons. So, wearing a mask in the library will be no different than that, So we've dealt with the public for years, and asking them nicely to comply with an additional rule, certainly isn't something that's new to us. So we'll be okay. We'll be
And then,
okay.
but on that thought process, Peggy, I had a question. So how would you handle, like, let's say if a patron came up to you and started complaining to you that another patron wasn't wearing a mask or was taking it off?
Well, I would simply go over and ask the patron who wasn't wearing the mask to please put on his mask. And if they refused, I'm lucky enough that in my library I have security, and then at that point my security would ask them to comply with our rule. And then if they didn't, we would have to ask them to leave at that point if they weren't going to follow the rule. And I'm looking at a document right now. The Illinois government has a rule regarding the wearing of face coverings in businesses. And what they're saying is that if someone doesn't want to comply, you can offer them alternate service. So like if somebody comes into your library and doesn't want to comply, then you would say, well, then I can offer you curbside or I can offer you home delivery if you don't want to wear the mask in the building. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. That's really
So
good. Where's that from? You said?
it's from the State of Illinois Department of Human Rights. It's an FAQ for businesses covering use of face coverings during COVID-19. I'll put the link on the oh gosh,
The chat.
no, in oh my gosh, my brain has gone completely blank. In the forum.
The forums?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Obviously, I didn't have enough coffee this morning. I'll put the link in the forum for everybody.
Okay, cool.
So
yeah, I would like to look at that.
Yeah, because I just pulled it up this morning and I'm looking at it. So it says that, it would not be it would be okay to do that, to offer them all, that way you're not discriminating against them, you're still offering them service, but you're making a reasonable accommodation for them.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a really good way to approach it. And the main reason why I wanted to bring it up was because this is all brand new, and when things are brand new, you don't always know what the best way to respond to them is. that being able to provide a patron with an alternative way of helping them is definitely a good workaround in that situation, because you're right, there are going to be some people who don't want to wear a mask, and I think that it would be better to just be like, look, we have curbside, we have, like you said, home delivery, so there's many other ways that we can help you and make sure everyone is safe.
Right. Okay. Anything else on mask wearing for the group? Okay. All right. Before we conclude our meeting today, any other topics anyone would like to ask about, or anything someone would like to share?
Peggy, this is Crystal. I just wanted to ask really quickly if it sounds like there's a lot of new trends and a lot of new ways to serve patrons. And Peggy and I had been talking about possibly doing a panel discussion sometime in August, and I was wondering if there were any other volunteers that would like to kind of talk about what they're doing in their library and what they are thinking they will implement even post-pandemic days. Like Peggy is talking about continuing with curbside and possibly home delivery. So I just kind of wanted to throw out the idea of having a panel discussion as part of our SWAN X web series in August. I will go ahead and let you all stew on that. If you could contact me by the end of next week with, just a quick email just stating that you'd be interested, and then we can get a panel together. If I don't get any responses, no big deal. We just won't. Oh, someone is getting a lot of feedback. We won't have to have it. It's just, it was just an idea we had kind of rolling around, and I wanted to open it up and give you guys an opportunity to share, what you're doing and what you think will stick.
We have a question from Karen. She wants to know what is the date expired library cards will be renewed to after July? And SWAN has responded after Labor Day that they're looking at September 8th at this point. So hopefully, Karen, that answers your question. And actually, I had the exact same question. Well, Karen says thank you. Hey, anything else from everyone before we leave for today? Okay. Well, I certainly want to thank everyone for attending today. Juan, do you have anything to add before we leave?
No, I don't. Thank you, Peggy.
I just want to thank everybody for attending. I'm certain that at your library it's very, very busy, very, very hectic. It's such, it's such a difficult time as everybody's to their library, serving their patrons, answering those telephone calls, getting materials ready for patrons to pick up or be delivered. So it really means a lot that everyone takes time out of their day to attend this meeting and share their thoughts, bring their questions, participate in the discussion, and tell us what you're doing at your library. That's how we all learn. That's how we all get great ideas to implement new things at our institutions. So I really, really appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure being with all of you this morning. I know that I speak not only for myself, but Juan and the SWAN staff in saying so. So thank you very, very much. And um, I wish everyone continued good health. And I hope to see you all soon. Have a good day.